So, in the process of keeping up with the news cycles that I actually like to listen to, artificial intelligence has kind of been on my mind recently. And that actually has to do with the whole situation with Powerworld. And I'm kind of recording this video in advance, so I might not be up to what's the latest happenings on it. But as of this point, I know of the false allegations, or at least someone made up allegations of them using AI in it, but also the fact that the dev was positive on using AI in the development of games. So it's kind of an interesting situation and kind of just got my wheels turning. Anyway, there are kind of two areas I want to tackle in this on AI and storytelling, and that is AI in the stories themselves, and also kind of AI in regards to what's currently going on in the world. I mean, with stories, we have two forms that AI will usually take. And the first is of that antagonist, where it's logical and unfeeling opponent that can calculate your almost every move and is supposedly better. And there's also the added irony of potentially being the undoing of its traitor. But the thing with that is that logical nature may often be its undoing, especially since humans tend be seemingly irrational or emotional and be willing to do things that AI simply doesn't account for, or being unpredictable in essence. So that's kind of like where it is as an opponent or an antagonist. But now, as part of like an ally or the protagonist, it takes on a different role. And the first is kind of potentially offering a different perspective, or at least being kind of a tag-along buddy for science fiction, where it can provide different tools at different points. But yet, in kind of a more major role, it offers a really kind of different yet relatable point of view. And that's probably one of the key elements of why we see so many, because it gets us an AI basically is almost natural for asking questions of what it means to be alive or what it's like to be different. And again, it goes into the sci-fi settings a lot, but again, those are questions that we all ask at one point or another, or like, what's the real meaning of being human? What is the purpose of being human? All those kinds of things that, or what is the purpose of being alive? All those kinds of things. And again, there's also the fact of, do I have to fulfill the role I've been programmed for, or that everyone's pushing me towards, or can I do something different? And that's also a question that AI is almost naturally poised to ask. So it's kind of an interesting thing in how they can basically go through these journeys that we ourselves are questioning and so forth, and they end up being very relatable characters as a result, even though we actually have little in common with them at times. But that's AI in stories. Now let's get on to more of AI and kind of how the world is currently operating and so forth, at least my understanding of what's going on. And it's not really like the stories at all in a sense, because AI at its current iteration is more of a tool and is thus neutral by itself. And I think that's the key point, is that as a tool, AI is much like a hammer or money. For instance, a hammer can be used to build and repair things, but it can also be used to demolish and destroy things as well. As well as money, it can be used to fund wars, and it can also provide food for the orphans. And so there's kind of the saying is, what is the intent and who is using it that really makes the difference of a tool. So with AI, one of the key things to think of is the who and what is coding and training the AI, because that is what will really make the difference. After all, what goes in is what comes out. That's the principle of the world that we should pay attention to. And it affects our health. Like what we eat is what our body will use to replenish its cells. What we put into our minds is how our brains will start to think. All those kinds of things make a difference. And so there are key things to be aware of, and AI is pretty much the same. Again, it's basically coded, so it has these hardwired things, but it's also trained to learn. And so what it's learning is what it will do. So AI will then make judgments based on the data and rules it has. So there's this thing where an AI might be very good at chess and be a very competitive or even potentially the best player because there's a certain amount of moves it to make and there are rules that it knows. But if you ask it a question about another game or ask it to play another game, then it might take a while to figure out. And again, there are a lot of auto functions in certain games where it's like, okay, the AI can sometimes do something interesting, but most of the time it's much better to play it yourself because you would react differently and make different choices. So again, if it doesn't have all the info or the system is a little bit complex, then the AI may struggle to make the right decision or the best decision at times. And another example of that is pathing in video games, where you have an NPC who is supposed to get from point A to point B, so it's trying to go in a straight line, but it gets stuck on the environment. And it just keeps running into that piece of the environment unless it has other programming that says you're not making it for progress, make a churn. And some AI will do that, but oftentimes it's just a simple dip from point A to point B. So you're waiting for the NPC to catch up with you and wondering what's the holdup, and you see it stuck on a tree branch somewhere. So it's kind of interesting to watch at times, but it can also be annoying when you're waiting for it to get done. But then you also have AIs that are part of procedurally generated content where you can give it a certain set of rules and it will create a constant refreshed world for the player to play in. So there's kind of things where you see a bit of brilliance, but also a bit of kind of not so brilliant stuff. Anyway, one of the major aspects of AI is also generative, and that is like creating content and so forth, creating artwork, creating stories, all that kind of stuff falls under, I guess, the generative umbrella. So there is the legality of that and also the copyright issues that come with that, especially when the designers of the AI or the trainers of the AI might not actually have the rights to actually use that copyrighted material. And how does that work out? Is it, especially since a lot of us have learned from potentially the works of someone or so forth, seeing stuff in examples. So there's a lot of different questions to think of here, and it's beyond my scope, so I'm not going to make any who or what decisions or like judgment based on it, and I'm kind of like waiting for that to kind of be settled, even though it might take a while before really diving in on it, or at least find out where the lines are being drawn. So it's just kind of interesting to observe. But then you have these cases where, like, if that's the case, then a company should basically take the content they own or the information they own, like access to audience reports and so forth, that the data that they're supposed to be using, and train the AI based on that data and so forth. Or you should have a person doing that. And so you have an AI that is almost like an assistant or an aggregator of data, and it can look over the data much more faster than a person can and probably put it together in a nice, easily digestible report. But again, that requires it to actually have the data and know what it should be looking for. And then you could possibly have it trained to be like, we want our boss to be happy. So we don't want to give them the actual news. And you have employees who are like that. So they give their boss a false report. So if they're the ones training the AI, then the AI is going to come up with a false report. So then there are certain things to be aware of in regards to that. But you also have how do those generative AIs compare with human creatives? And I think one of the important things to remember is that even in our age of factories, there is still a desire for handmade items. After all, you're selling to people, you aren't selling to machines, at least at this point. But the thing is, with those handmade items, there is kind of that sense of uniqueness of it being handmade, handcrafted rather than factory produced. But there is also probably potential quality as someone has paid attention to the process rather than a factory thing where there might be a few mishaps and that's fine. But someone actually making something may actually have a bit of more terror and thought put into it. And there also may be an emotional connection there. Think of how a child will light a plate and decorate it. And it may not actually be a good plate at all, but as a parent, you want to hold on to that plate and keep it. You might display it rather than actually use it, but you still want to hold on to it. So the thing is to remember that those things in regards to our audience, and maybe thinking of our audience almost as our patrons who are going to buy our product or whatever, is also a good way to think of it. and think of who is actually going to buy what I'm putting out. And so you also want to be aware of your audience wants. So if your audience is basically very consumer based mindset where they just want to binge content all the time and just enjoy it, then maybe AI really is a competitor to you, where it's constantly putting out content faster than you may be able to create it. And it also knows what the audience wants, so it doesn't really stray from that. So it might be predictable, but people are just able to enjoy that predictable content all the time because they can just binge it and enjoy it and so forth. But yet, if you have an emotional connection with your audience, if they liked you for your work for you, in essence, then you probably have a bit of a leg up on it, or they like the style you do or whatever because they want to see more of what you do. So I guess one of the ways to basically stand apart from AI is to put a bit of yourself in your work and also acknowledge that it is your work so that people know that when they support that work, they are supporting you. And also to be willing to learn and spiral upward and learn more about what your audience likes and what they don't, and also how to just create better quality work. At least those are kind of my thoughts on this matter. So since this is a very interesting topic, why not feel free to share your comments or, well, in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, you can like and share it so that others may see as well. And if you want to see more videos like this, you can subscribe to our channel so that you can watch more videos as they come out. Anyway, I'm Jonah, and you've been watching Lion's Mane Media, where we celebrate stories and the lessons learned from them. Talk to you later, and have a great rest of your day.